You're watching Gearz, brought to you by O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day.
When it comes to building or working on a project vehicle, they are not all created equal because there are different degrees of difficulty depending on what your goals are. And since we've got viewers all around the nation with different skill levels, it's important that we cover all aspects of this on Gearz. Now, the first project that people usually jump into is some sort of a restoration project, where you remove old, worn-out parts, watch the exhaust pipe, and replace them with new ones and basically make the vehicle new again. The next step up, and a little more difficult, is the Restomod, or the makeover. This is where you actually remove old, outdated parts but you're upgrading the vehicle with new aftermarket parts that bring it more up to date so it handles, stops, and performs better. Now, since this usually involves problem solving, making parts fit, and some mild fabrication, it's more challenging and time consuming. Of course, the next level of project is the most difficult, and it's generally what we call the conceptual ground-up build. This is where you'll take a vehicle and completely redesign it and turn it into something that's never existed before, using parts from wherever. A lot of street rod projects, rat rods, pro touring cars, race cars, rock crawlers can be this kind of project. Now, since there's no directions, there's no guide for doing this sort of project, and it usually involves a ton of fabrication and design work, we get a lot of guys asking, how do you do a project like this? So we're going to show you what we're doing on Sergeant Rock. Now, the goal for this project was to build something with street rod level detail, hot rod level performance, rock crawler level ruggedness, and monster truck style size and strength, all wrapped in a vintage World War II skin to pay tribute to our military. This is how we're mixing all that together. With the truck stripped down to a bare frame for the final time, I finished up the fabrication and metalwork on the frame and suspension components. Then the frame was all smoothed down, painted, and set aside for reassembly. At this point, the axles were completely disassembled, and those huge Rockwell housings and massive radius arms were lugged down to Mr. Speed powder coating in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, to be cleaned up and coated.
Take it all the way down to the metal. We'll strip it, blast it, and after we blast it, then we'll pre-treat it, clean it, dry it, heat it, bake it, coat it, and then bake it.
That's kind of where the whole Mr. Speed thing comes from. Comes from my father and his energy, also into the turnaround time which we provide to our customers.
Once everything was cleaned up, the next step was to tape off any areas where we didn't want powder coating. Finally, the housings were coated in a splatter bronze and the radius arms in a cast silver. Both will give us a really cool textured detail that fits really nice with the rugged military vibe that we got going on with the rest of the truck. With the parts back from Mr. Speed, it was time for the final assembly of the axles. So, in went the Overson forged axle shafts. On went the massive differential engineering disc brakes. Followed by the NOAC hydraulic steering cylinder. Then it was all reassembled for the final time. And you can see what a difference all the extra smoothing and grinding made as well as all those stainless steel button head screws that run down the frame. Now, that took a lot of extra time, and a lot of it might be covered when the body goes on, but it's those kind of little details that make a big difference in the final project. After that, the tires were wrestled into place, and the drivetrain was lowered into its final resting place. Now, just in case you've forgotten, this is an 850 horse, all aluminum 605 big block Mopar from Indy Cylinder Heads, a built 727 torque flight from Bowler Transmission, and an Atlas II transfer case. All tucked nicely underneath a 1941 Dodge Power Wagon body and custom bed. Now, to plumb the brakes, I didn't want big ugly hoses hanging down in the middle of the axles. So I fabricated special tubes that bolt to the top of the radius arms to hold the brake lines. This way, the hard lines stay protected, and for flexibility, I just use small hoses at the ends for a much cleaner, uncluttered look. When it came time to do the rest of the plumbing, it was really important to take our time planning everything out because we're mixing a lot of parts here. The brakes use a Hydro Boost system from Power Brake Service. And that had to be plumbed into the Charlin valve from Nowak, the March Power steering pump on the engine, and the reservoir from Eddy Motorsports, which was a perfect fit on the firewall. The rear steering uses its own electric pump, so we fabricated a bracket to mount it over the rear axle. And then just like the front, we made our hoses using hardware from Earl's Plumbing and hooked everything up. Hey, we're back and walking through some of the final assembly of Sergeant Rock. Now obviously the truck's back together, we got the brakes and the hydraulic steering laid out. Now we're moving on to the interior. Check out what we're doing on the dash. Since the truck is tied in with the Memphis Belle, and a B-17's instrument panel is very linear in its layout, I chose Classic Instruments bomber gauges and laid them out like you'd see them in an airplane. And since all military trucks are loaded with all kinds of data plates, I picked up some reproductions from vintage Power Wagons to give the truck the right military vibe and just a touch of irony. Also fitting right in with the look are these slider AC vents from Vintage Air. For a steering column, I cut down an I Did It hot rod column and fabricated my own U-joint to connect it to the Charlin valve. Now, since there's no room for a tilt column, and it wouldn't look right anyway, the bracket that holds it all in place was fabricated from 1/8-inch steel and designed to put the steering wheel in the driver's hands with no need for a tilt. Now, obviously, since I've got my steering column in place and all my gauges laid out, I should have a pretty good idea of where I'm going to mount the seats, and I do. But as you can see, there's no place to mount them here. This is just wide open, which is very typical for this kind of project. So the first challenge you've got, if you decide to do a project like this, is to fabricate something to mount the seats to. So first, we'll make a panel to cover the hole. Then, with the seats mocked in place, we'll take some measurements for side brackets and center braces. Then we'll build them out of 1/4-inch steel straps so we have plenty of strength. Then, after a quick trip to powder coat, we'll bolt the newly built brackets in place. Now we have a very strong foundation to bolt our seats to. And since these are Mastercraft racing seats under all this cool leather, they're fully adjustable. Okay, the next challenge is the floor, because we've got 2 original pieces here, but we also have a brake pedal and all kinds of hydraulic lines and cables, a gas pedal that need to go down through the floor somehow. So, starting with the front panel, it was notched to fit the brake pedal, the gas pedal, the hydraulic hoses, and the cables. For the gas pedal, we had to get creative. So we took a new low-car eliminator pedal that runs the cable underneath the floor and joined it with a classic Moon gasser pedal to give us a vintage look with modern function. Needless to say, both pieces had to be severely modified to fit the tight cab of our 41 Dodge, but the result was definitely worth the effort. Okay, with the front panel in place and looking really good, the center part here is next. So the first thing we're going to do, chuck that old beat up floor panel and then build a new one that utilizes the original frame, but is held in place with stainless steel button head screws just like the front panel. The result is a super clean metal floor with a riveted military look. Hey, welcome back to Gearz, where we are in the process of showing you it is possible to build a new interior in an old vehicle where there was nothing before, if you take your time and plan it out. Now, so far, we've fabricated brackets and mounted our seats, we built new floors, we designed the steering column, and we laid out all the gauges. Now comes the tricky part, because we still have to mount the shifter out here somewhere. We have to do something about the transfer case shift levers. We also have a switch for the rear steer that's got to go somewhere. And of course, we want to hide all these cables. We don't want them looking like this. So that means we're going to have to build some sort of a console. Now, this console is going to have to bridge the floor because we still want to be able to remove this floor panel. It's got to mount all of this stuff. It's got to hide the cables, and it still has to look good. Now, all these details can make your head explode if you're not careful. And the best way to solve them is just one at a time. We're going to start by taking some measurements and laying out a basic diagram of the design, the shape, and the dimensions of what we want. Now, don't be surprised if this takes a little bit of trial and error, since you're basically creating a piece that's never existed before. Once you're happy with your design, you can start building. Now, I'm using 3/4 inch square tubing to build an inner structure that'll give me the look and the strength that I need, but at the same time, give me a solid base for all the other stuff that needs to mount to it. With the frame done and tested for fit and function, it's time to deal with the outer skin. Now, to match the metal and rivet look that we got going on in the rest of the truck, I fabricated panels out of 14 gauge aluminum to fit the sides, the top, and the bottom. Now, once they're trued up, we'll put on a brush finish, and then we'll coat them with shark hide so they don't tarnish. Then we'll mount them using brass button head screws to match what we did on the dash. To hold the rear steering switches, I also fabricated a bracket to mount on the back of the console out of the way, but still within easy reach. All right, time to start putting it all together. And the first thing that goes in are the transfer case levers between the seats. Next, we'll slide the console in place and route the cables inside and hook everything up, followed by the shifter, and finally the front aluminum panel goes on to finish it all off and give us a really cool, unique console that fits the look of the truck perfectly, hides all the cables and junk inside, and still allows us to remove the floor section if we need to. Exactly what we wanted. And the best part is, you're never going to see another console that looks exactly like that one, because this was custom made for this specific vehicle. And that's what you want to do on your project.
And now, Gauge Tech. Brought to you by Stuart Warner. We were there when it all began.
His defeat by the jalopy was a challenge he has accepted.
Since the dawn of hot rodding, one of the first modifications to go in a car were some aftermarket gauges to keep track of what was going on with the engine. Since most early cars didn't have full instrumentation, just usually a speedo and some idiot lights. And that combination has never been a really good idea. Now, believe it or not, the cardboard display in your new gauge box will make a perfect template for laying out and sizing your holes. All you have to do is transfer the opening to some cardboard, and then lay them out on a template with the spacing and the shape that you want. Now, moving the gauges around will allow you to experiment with different looks and designs until you get exactly the look you're after. Now, to cut the holes, a hole saw would be great if you could find the right size. Unfortunately, as you can see, most hole saws aren't even close to being the right size of a modern gauge. Also remember that a gauge has a very small bezel on it, which means that hole has to be exactly the right size for this thing to fit properly. So one way that you can cut the hole is with a jigsaw. Now, these are pretty maneuverable, and they're great if you're cutting down on top of something like this where you have easy access. But if you get up onto a dash, you're going to start damaging things, and there is no way you're going to get down into something like this. So I have found that the best tool is an air saw. These are highly maneuverable. They'll let you get all the way around where you need to go, even in some difficult places like this, and they're great for cutting metal. But whichever way you cut the holes, remember this: it's a heck of a lot easier to take a file and open up a hole a little bit that you might have cut a little too small than it is to take a welder and weld metal back in if you've cut the hole too big.
Now, Quick Tip. Brought to you by E3 Spark Plugs. Born to burn.
When it comes to running wiring or hoses through a metal panel, most everybody knows you need to use some sort of a rubber grommet to protect the wiring. The problem is, if you've got an odd-shaped cut like this, well, a rubber grommet's not going to do you much good, especially if the panel needs to be removable. Fortunately, there's a simple solution in this rubber edge trim that you can pick up at your auto parts store. Now, as you can see, this is a rubber hose that's teardrop shaped. It's split and has an adhesive in the center, and it's originally designed to go around the edge of a panel and protect it, which makes it perfect for going around a cut like this and giving you the protection you need. So when you're finished, you've got a panel that's protected by the rubber, the adhesive holds it in place, and it looks good. Proving once again that sometimes the best solutions come from places you don't expect. If you'd like to learn more tips to make your life easier in the shop, check out the tips page on the website.
What are you working on? Brought to you by Woodward Fabrication, selling quality metalworking equipment since 1966.
Today's What Are You Working On comes from Rose Turner from Kentucky, and she and her husband have a project that she inherited from her dad. It's the ultimate summer cruiser, a Manx-style dune buggy. Check this thing out. Now, as you can see, it didn't start out looking too good when they got it from her dad. Matter of fact, it needed a complete restoration. So the first plan was to just get the thing roadworthy, which they did, and then they drove it for a summer. But the decision was made to tear it apart and fully restore it. So here's what happened. The first thing that they did is pull the body off, and the VW chassis was completely restored and the engine gone through and rebuilt. Then the body was painted right there in their garage, and a new black interior with off-road racing seats was fit in place. And when the dust finally cleared, a screaming red dune buggy came roaring out. Take a look. Now, Rose says that the best part is the sense of pride she has when they cruise this thing around, because she knows it belonged to her dad. Now it belongs to her. One of these days, it's going to belong to her own kids. Yeah, that's some lucky kids there. Now, Rose, to recognize the project that you and your husband did, we hooked up with our buddies at Woodward Fab. We're going to give you a 10-inch throatless shear. It's great for cutting metal. I'm sure you could have used it on the last project. Also, we're going to hook you up with one of our project planning books, so you can document everything you did on that project, so you can service it, and you can work on it and take care of it. Also, since we've done a bunch with Sergeant Rock today, we're going to give you a Sergeant Rock package, which is a shirt, obviously for your husband, and then a die cast, and then one of the brass guitar picks. And one more thing, we have a gift card from O'Reilly's, so you can save some money when you go down to buy some auto parts. Now, for the rest of you guys, I know you're saying, gosh, how do I get in on this? Well, you got to get a project. Go to the website, click on Gearz Nation, and submit the project. We pull everything right off of that. So what are you waiting for? Get out there. Start working on something. Let's see what you got. We'll see you next time.